Is there a giant ape living in North America?
I know for a fact Bigfoot exists. I've seen it with my own two eyes.
It shouldn't be here, according to evolutionary theory. The problem is it seems to be here.
Or are some people simply trying to fool the scientists and the rest of the public?
I'm willing to accept that it exists. All I'm saying is show me the proof.
I've seen this creature. It is alive, and it's not a belief, it's a fact.
It is one of the greatest ever mysteries, and it's based right here in the American Northwest. Is there an unknown beast lurking in the forests of the American Northwest? Thousands of people say they've seen it. It is part ape, part man, almost 9 feet tall, covered from head to foot in thick dark hair, and it walks on 2 legs. It's sometimes called Sasquatch, a Native American word. One of more than 80 names they have for such a creature. More commonly, it's known as Bigfoot. Could this beast be the fabled missing link that proves we humans are descended from apes? A link that, if proved, would be explosive.
It challenges our thinking about everything that we know about science, about culture, about mythology. This is a creature that shouldn't be, yet is.
It is a mystery to be solved. All the evidence is not in, and we haven't yet, one way or the other, conclusively proved that it exists or that it does not exist.
We have footprints supposedly left by this creature, and countless eyewitness stories, yet we still do not have any corpses, blood samples, or even bones. So does this creature exist, or is this simply the biggest hoax in human history? It is in places like this that people say they've seen a Bigfoot or Sasquatch. It's one of the least explored areas of North America, the Pacific Northwest. Northern California, Oregon, and Washington, and the southwest of Canada, British Columbia. There are thousands of square miles of dense forest, much of it still unexplored. Every year, over 25 million Americans and Canadians come here to hunt, fish, and to see the dazzling range of wildlife. It is in this wilderness that thousands of people over the last 6 decades claim to have seen a Bigfoot. It's rare to find a scientist who admits they believe in such a mysterious beast, let alone do research into it. One of those who does is Dr. John Bindernagel, a wildlife biologist from Vancouver Island, British Columbia. He thinks the forests of the Pacific Northwest are exactly where you'd find a Bigfoot.
The armchair skeptic tends to think that, we've hiked all over and climbed all over and hunted all over most of North America. That really isn't true. Many people don't appreciate just how uninhabited many parts of North America still are. Most Sasquatch reports come from animals which have been seen either in the forest or near the forest, and it does indeed appear that the Sasquatch is a forest animal. Forest animals are in the forest for a couple of reasons. One is, of course, food, and another is cover. Many animals are very shy and really do not like to be caught out in the open. There's all this cover. It's often referred to as hiding cover, which gives an animal a sense of security, just the ability not to be caught out in the open, not to be seen.
When sightings of a Bigfoot or Sasquatch are reported, people seem to agree. Those who say they've seen one have described it, even drawn it, in very similar ways. No one knows more about Bigfoot than John Green of Harrison Hot Springs in British Columbia. He's spent the last 50 years studying the beast, and during that time he's collected more than 4,000 statements from people who say they've seen one. Statements that have a remarkable amount in common.
These reports are tremendously consistent. The vast majority of the sightings are of a single individual, something that is much more heavily built than a human. Some people think it's a human-like face, some people think it's an ape-like face. It's always wide shoulders. Well, if you imagine an upper body the size of a gorilla and the legs of a heavily built human, this would include probably 90% of the reports.
I have become quite convinced that most sightings do not become reports. I have talked to a lot of eyewitnesses, and it's almost like pulling teeth to get them to share their reports. You know, they've told someone about this creature they've seen, they've been laughed at or ridiculed or made fun of in some way, and they've said, that's it, I'm not going to mention it again.
The next story is typical, but it's never been told on television before. According to 3 Canadians, 2 schoolteachers and an electrical engineer, it happened one warm spring night in 1988. They were camping in Alberta.
We'd been playing cards and sitting around the campfire, and I decided that I was very tired, so Scott and I grabbed our toothbrushes and started walking down the path towards the washrooms. I had a very uneasy feeling that there was something ahead of us on the trail.
We heard a noise, and this grunt can only be described as like the grunt of a bull.
Our eyes focused on the silhouette of a very large creature standing about 6 feet in front of me on the trail.
Susan came tearing back down the path past us to the cars.
I was running to the car. Sue was running to the car. We ended up in the same car together, and with the doors locked.
This creature walked out of the darkness into the direct beam of our headlights.
It strode purposeful into the bush, took about 4 seconds as it crossed the beam of our headlights and disappeared into the forest.
This creature was 8 to 9 feet tall. It was standing straight up.
I went from being a total non-believer to a total believer in the Sasquatch in the space of about 4 seconds once those headlights came on in the car.
I know enough that what I did see was, in fact, Sasquatch.
People say to me, where's the proof? And I don't know where the proof is. All I do know is if you'd seen what I saw that night, you'd be a believer too.
Every time we travel as a family to the mountains, or if I'm on my own going on a ski trip, you just look at the mountains and you look up there and you know they're up there, that a place that you thought was pretty much barren has some living creatures up there that we never dreamed existed.
But most scientists think the eyewitness stories are just that, stories. Frank Poirier is one of them. He's a professor of anthropology at Stetson University in Florida. Poirier is one of those who isn't convinced by all the alleged Bigfoot sightings.
Eyewitness sightings present you with many, many kinds of problems. And I think most of them are tainted. We have seen so many depictions of Sasquatch on our television and Hollywood films, in newspapers. When you talk to people, they all look the same. Does that mean that what everybody's seeing is the truth and they're all reporting the truth? I don't think so. Where is there an unbiased report? I would dismiss the vast majority of those eyewitness sightings, not because these are dishonest people, but simply because there's not a fresh eye looking at them.
So despite thousands of reported sightings, Bigfoot is still widely regarded either as a myth or a hoax, and is therefore known as a cryptozoological animal. But if it is ever proven to be real, it will join a long list of creatures whose existence was first doubted due to a lack of evidence. These animals were often recorded in the folklore of native dwellers, but were dismissed by so-called enlightened modern man, until one day they were discovered to exist for real.
We're hoping one day that Sasquatch is in the zoological catalogue, along with other animals that once were thought to be cryptozoological. The mountain gorilla was the subject of great speculation and cynicism for a long time. They said this animal can't possibly exist, until it was proven to do so in the early 1900s. So we're hoping that one day the Sasquatch will be a known animal and no longer in the cryptozoological realm.
The world's scientific and academic institutions don't spend money researching Bigfoot. That's hardly surprising, since they don't even recognize its existence. Instead, any research into this mysterious creature is carried out by dedicated amateurs. John Pickering is one of them. He's so obsessed with the Bigfoot that he spends much of his spare time looking for them. This is no half-hearted exercise. When he travels to a location to track Bigfoot, he comes prepared. He's setting up camp for the weekend in Quinault Forest on the west coast of Washington State. There have been 30 alleged Bigfoot sightings reported here in the last 2 decades. Pickering will camp day and night in his pursuit of the creature, and armed with specialist equipment, he believes he has a good chance of finding one.
There's a lot of people that report seeing them, but there's a lot of people that don't. It's kind of, my father had a saying, he says, you can't catch a fish unless you put your fish in, or your hook in the water. Well, same thing, unless you go out there and look, you're not going to see one.
But to locate a Bigfoot, you need more than high-tech equipment. You need to understand the mysteries of the forest. Pickering is a tracker who knows how to spot subtle signs of animal activity. Signs that wouldn't be noticed by most people.
You're looking for any sign that animals may have left when they've been through the area, whether it be footprints on the ground or possibly like a broken twig or palm frond. Anything that'll show that the animals or something has been through the area and have created some sort of evidence that they've been there. Like over here, these ferns, they have been picked by people picking ferns. You can see that they're all cut off. That was a sign that someone's been here and done that. Animals leave their own signs, whether it be footprints, maybe a little bit of hair left along some brush. There's always something there to be found.
So just how many Bigfoot could there be living in these forests? John Bindernagel thinks the number could be more than we've ever dreamed of.
As far as the number of Sasquatches go, the only person I've ever heard venture a reasonable figure on this was a physical anthropologist, and he suggested 2,000 to 4,000 for western North America, west of the Rockies. I think that's not a bad figure as a ballpark figure. A lot of people think that's way too high. My feeling is that if anything, it might be low.
To assume that 1,500 or 2,000 Sasquatch might exist in North America, and no one to come up with some hard evidence for these things, to me is a very difficult thing to swallow. You need to have bones, you need to have a body. The kinds of bones we would be looking for Sasquatch that would be most useful, for example, would be teeth, because from those teeth you can tell if in fact it is a primate, that is, are you dealing with a monkey or an ape or a human, or perhaps some unknown animal closely associated with that group. And everyone will tell you that for Sasquatch, we don't have one of those bones. We don't even have a piece of one of those bones.
But Bindernagel isn't surprised by the lack of physical evidence.
This question of the absence of Sasquatch bones is a real dilemma, and I understand people's concern with that. It's quite valid. However, as a wildlife biologist, I have less concern about that maybe than others, and I know that archaeologists are not so troubled because both archaeologists and biologists understand how quickly bones disappear. They get scattered by scavengers and broken down by bacteria, chewed on by rodents. I just know that I've only found 2 bear skulls in all the 30-some years of trumping the forests here. Maybe a dozen or so deer skeletons, and there's thousands and thousands of deer. So based on that, I'm not surprised myself that we haven't found a Sasquatch bones.
Eyewitnesses may claim to have seen a Bigfoot, but eyewitnesses can make mistakes. So what about the giant footprints that are sometimes found by people while walking through forests? Are these just one more hoax, or could they be something more? Unlike other unexplained phenomena, such as UFOs or ghosts, Bigfoot supposedly leave behind a record of where they've been. They leave tracks. This piece of film from the 1960s records one set of tracks found in Northern California. Are these the footprints of a mysterious creature or just another link in a gigantic hoax? There are many more people who claim to have found Bigfoot tracks than say they've actually seen the creature. This is what's supposed to have happened to a 14-year-old boy who was on a camping trip with his father and uncle. They were high in the snow-covered Cascade Mountains of Washington State. Now, as a man, he claims to remember that day as if it were yesterday.
We were on a very well-beaten game trail on the top of a shale ridge heading towards Mount Hoquiam. I looked down, I could see fresh tracks cutting across the snowdrift downhill at a 45-degree angle. I decided to go down and look at the tracks in the snow that we could see. I was standing on top of the snowdrift, and these tracks were breaking all the way through to the hard shale underneath. So it was a very heavy animal. It had toes, and the tracks looked like human feet. I noticed that it took 3 or 4 of my strides to make one of the strides of the tracks I was looking at. I've been an avid hunter and fisherman my whole life. I've been in the woods a lot. I've seen a lot of animal sign, and this don't compare to any of it.
When tracks are found, Bigfoot researchers often take impressions of them.
It's getting better.
Back in Washington's Quinault Forest, John Pickering is mixing plaster to make casts of any footprints he finds. Using his own boot, he demonstrates how the mixture is poured into a print and left to harden. Jeff Meldrum is an associate professor of anatomy at Idaho State University. He's an expert on locomotion, how humans and animals actually move. He's studied more than 100 casts of footprints from all over Northwest America. Footprints he believes have been left by Bigfoot.
Well, short of a body or a corpse or even a substantial tissue sample, the tracks are probably the most significant collection of data that we have. If all we had to work with were just eyewitness reports, then they could simply be dismissed as just stories. But we have the passage of something leaving its trace in the ground.
Many of the casts Jeff Meldrum has studied show remarkable similarities in size and shape. These are feet which bend and grip in the way only a living creature's can. A creature which walks on 2 feet like a man, but has feet much larger than those of a human.
Here's a cast that exemplifies a typical Sasquatch footprint. It's just under 15 inches. The average length for Sasquatch tracks is about 16.5 inches. This one shows many of the characteristics that are distinctive of the Sasquatch tracks that differentiate it from a human footprint. The track is typically rather flat or indicates a flat foot, although this one has a dynamic feature, a mid-pressure ridge that's pushed up here behind the transverse tarsal joint, or the mid-tarsal break. That's a very ape-like characteristic. Otherwise, the footprint is relatively wide for its length. The toes are quite long. The big toe is somewhat differentiated, and the toe row is decidedly angled.
Meldrum is convinced that these footprints are genuine. For him, the evidence for saying a Bigfoot made them is overwhelming.
The evidence that I have examined rather systematically is so consistent that it's gotten to the point where it's more incredible to suggest that these are all hoaxes than it is to at least entertain the possibility that such an animal exists in North America.
Could these really be the footprints of a Bigfoot? One man who thought he could help in the investigation was Jimmy Chilcutt, a police fingerprint expert based in Conroe, Texas. After seeing Jeff Meldrum on TV talking about these tracks, he contacted him. As well as being an expert in human prints, Chilcutt has carried out a research project compiling a database of finger and footprints from every known primate, such as chimpanzees and gorillas. A footprint can provide as much information as a fingerprint. It's crucial evidence.
Having studied primate prints and human prints for so long, I'm probably one of the few people in the world who know the difference between non-human primate and human primate. So I called Dr. Meldrum and I explained my special expertise and asked that if I could come up and examine or look at the castings that he had.
Chilcutt began his examination of Jeff Meldrum's casts. But unlike Meldrum, who's an expert on the anatomy of the foot, Chilcutt focused on the fine lines on the foot surface. These are known as friction ridges and are the intricate lines whose shape and direction show up on footprints, just like the lines on fingerprints do. And when he examined one particular set of casts, he couldn't believe what he was seeing.
I came across a cast that was cast in 1967 in Northern California. And this was approximately a 13-inch cast, but what struck me, and it struck me immediately, was the friction ridges were not human, nor were they any non-human primate that I'd ever studied. And looking at this, you could tell that this was a species in of itself, something new that we haven't studied before. Went into Dr. Meldrum's office and I said, Dr. Meldrum, come out to the lab. Have you seen this casting? And he explained, yes, that's a Northern California cast in 1967. And I said, did you see the ridges? And he said, yes, but they didn't mean anything to us. And I said, my God, this is absolute proof that there is an animal out there.
The friction ridges on the feet of all known primates run diagonally. On human feet, the ridges go from side to side. But the lines on the prints taken from the Bigfoot casts were very different. They ran up and down the side of the foot. Then Chilcutt examined another set of Meldrum's casts. These were from footprints found in 1987 in Washington State, almost 700 miles away from the first set of casts he had just investigated. And he was amazed to discover they had exactly the same detailed characteristics as he had found on the casts from Northern California dating from 20 years earlier.
In order for these castings to have been faked, number one, they would have had to have been faked by the same person, miles and miles apart, and 15 to 20 years later. That person would have had to use the same ridge flow pattern, the same texture. The probability of the castings that I've examined have been faked very, very unlikely, nearly impossible.
For Chilcutt and Meldrum, there was only one possible conclusion.
We have a primate in North America. The ridge flow pattern of this animal is different from any known primate, but it is primate.
There are footprints, as everyone knows. There are reputed sightings, but all these bits of information, at least in my opinion, can be interpreted in many different ways. And I don't believe that any of the material now attributed to Sasquatch, in fact, is hard and fast evidence.
The skeptics that say there is no such thing as Sasquatch, if they examined the evidence I've examined with the same technical eye that I examine it with, they could only conclude that there is an animal out there.
But if the evidence provided by the footprints isn't conclusive proof that Bigfoot exists, then what could be more compelling than actually seeing it? And not just seeing it, but filming it. That is what one man said he did in 1967. His story put one small town in Northern California firmly on the tourist trail. Willow Creek, a small, sleepy town in Northern California, surrounded by dense forest. The kind of town where everybody knows your name. And everybody knows the name of the thing that the town is most famous for: Bigfoot. This is the Bigfoot capital of the USA. Since the 1950s, there have been over a dozen reported sightings in this small area.
I think that he's rather large, hairy, smelly. I don't think he eats people or anything.
I personally have never seen any evidence of it, but a lot of people believe in it, and I wouldn't discredit their thinking.
I spent my summers as a kid up in the mountains, and there was a lot of weird things that weren't usual. I believe he's out there somewhere.
I just don't believe in it. Now my wife, she's an adamant believer.
Obviously he eats something, and probably right from the forest, but you don't know. You may be down in your own backyard at night and you just don't even know it.
I think to be able to avoid man like they have, that it proves that they are more intelligent than we think they are.
The town made its reputation thanks to this man, Roger Patterson, a former rodeo cowboy turned Bigfoot researcher. In 1967, he traveled to nearby Bluff Creek from his home in Washington State. Bluff Creek was a place where tracks had recently been found. Patterson, who was making a documentary about Bigfoot, intended to film the tracks. Instead, something happened that would change the Bigfoot story forever. According to Patterson, he was riding his horse in Bluff Creek when he startled a Bigfoot that had been crouching behind a log. His horse shied when the creature appeared, throwing Patterson to the ground. As the Bigfoot walked quickly away, Patterson grabbed his camera and shot a minute of some of the most sensational footage ever filmed. Is this the genuine record of a Bigfoot, or just an elaborate hoax? A man in a gorilla suit. Back in Willow Creek, an excited Roger Patterson couldn't wait to tell his friend Al Hodgson.
Roger called me and he said, "Al, I got a picture of the son of a buck." And it was the exact words. He was a rather calm man. And of course, on the day that he got that film, he was anything but calm. I have no reason to doubt the man at all, and particularly after talking to him that night, I thought he was credible. It's something that I wanted to believe, but I didn't want to be taken in.
There are those who think the film is genuine. Jeff Meldrum, an anatomist at Idaho State University, is one of them.
To many people, the Patterson film is little more than a man in a fursuit. But upon careful examination, a number of features can be noticed that speak to the contrary. For example, the muscles can be seen moving under the skin. The shoulder blades can be seen moving. The massiveness of the limbs, the proportions of the shoulders and hips, all of these things suggest a body build that's quite distinct from a human being.
The musculature of this creature is very different from that of a human being. And the way this creature walks, locomotion kind of settles it. No human being walks naturally with their knees bent. And to have the fluidity of the subject in the Patterson film, you would have to train somebody for months and months and months to walk like that. This is not a man in a gorilla suit. This is an entirely different creature.
For many people, the best bit of evidence for the existence of Sasquatch is the Patterson film. They say that the creature is very large and that there are no known creatures that are as large as this individual. That's one pillar of their evidence. The second pillar of their evidence is that the gait, the way that this creature walks, is such that it cannot be hoaxed by any living human being. Both those bits of evidence are really not very strong. You can't reconstruct accurately the height and weight of that creature because we don't know the angle at which the film was taken. And secondly, the gait, the way that that creature walks, is easily reproducible by any modern living human. I don't think that film shows anything. I think that film's a hoax.
But Bigfoot researcher John Green, who knew Roger Patterson well, is convinced that it's authentic.
I have no doubt that the Patterson film is genuine. I know enough about Roger's situation and abilities to know that there's no possible way he could have faked such a thing. You know, all this is supposed to have been done by an ex-rodeo cowboy. I mean, come off it. The idea that this is a fake film has got an awful lot of hurdles to surmount. Of course, over the years, over and over again, somebody announces that they were the man in the suit or they know who did it and so on and so forth. And none of these stories ever stand up, but the film is still there, just as solid as it was in the beginning.
Whatever the truth is behind the film, the secret may have gone with Roger Patterson to his grave. But there is no doubt that the film he shot has given Willow Creek a new lease of life. Bigfoot is certainly good for business. Thousands of visitors come here every summer to enjoy the fishing and camping, and of course, hopefully, to catch a glimpse of Bigfoot. A few hundred miles away in Washington's Quinault Forest, John Pickering is also hoping for a sight of this elusive creature. Will this weekend turn out to be one he never forgets? In Quinault Forest on the west coast of Washington State, amateur Bigfoot researcher John Pickering is setting up his next piece of equipment to try and track down a creature.
There's been recorded sounds that have supposedly been Sasquatch. This is just kind of a setup system with some old house speakers and a car stereo I've set up so I can broadcast some sounds and hopefully get a return call.
And to attract the creatures, he resorts to a bizarre technique occasionally carried out by Bigfoot researchers: stick beating.
Basically, it's been reported that Sasquatch will beat sticks against trees, possibly as a form of communication, maybe a threat. It's been reported that at times, if you attempt to do this, do it yourself, that they will answer back and do the same.
It's been a pretty good day today, and we'll get this fire going for the season.
Fred Bradshaw and Cliff Crook both believe that Bigfoot just has to be seen to be believed. And they speak from experience. They both say that they've seen one. They're chopping wood for a campfire in another of Washington's forests. They take people into the depths of the forest for free to teach them about these mysterious creatures and maybe even to see one.
I take people into different areas so that I could show them creatures that I've seen and see how magnificent they really are. If you see one of them, it's just for a few seconds, they'll turn and walk away. Or you won't see them all, you'll just hear them make a sound like a grunt or a type of squeal or scream.
According to Bigfoot researchers, there is little activity until nightfall. Most sightings of the creature are at night. But is this because eyewitnesses can easily misidentify other animals or even people after dark? Or could it be because the Bigfoot is a nocturnal creature? This is what happened to Terry and Connie Reams one night. They were on the freeway in Portland, Oregon, traveling home to Yakima, Washington.
We seen a bunch of taillights of the cars ahead of us. The taillights were swerving and the brake lights coming on and so forth, so we knew something up there ahead of us was in the road. Running along the cement barrier in the direction that we were headed, eastbound, this creature, or a thing, was running down the road. And our first impression, of course, at least my first impression, was that somebody had gotten a wreck and they were just running down the highway and they were going to get hit by somebody. As we got up to this creature, it made a full body turn looking down at the car. And as I looked up at this, in the window at this creature, it looked down at me. And I seen its face quite vividly. You know, it was a vision of fear and surprise. I mean, it's big eyes, and you could tell it was definitely scared.
I don't think at first you really realize that it is what you think you see. The thing I remember mostly about it was the fur, of course, the stride. It had a very long stride and the sway of and length of the arms.
It was obvious that it was not a human being. We had decided at that time maybe we should call the State Patrol and turn this in. I told him exactly what happened, where and when, and he told me that, well, don't feel bad about it. We realized what had happened. We had over a dozen people turn the same incident in the same area at the same time. And if it makes you feel any better, 4 of them were police officers.
When one sees a Sasquatch, as the witnesses have, their first tendency is to say, it looked so much like a man, or it looked so human-like. I think what they're connecting with is the ability of this animal, in its facial expressions, to convey things such as surprise, fear, curiosity. It looks more like a human being in terms of its facial features than it does ape.
It is now late at night in the Quinault Forest. It's pitch black and the temperature is barely above zero. John Pickering is broadcasting sounds of gorillas from his audio equipment in the hope that it might entice a Bigfoot out into the clearing in the forest. If it does, he'll be ready.
Because a Sasquatch is believed to be a nocturnal animal, I'll go out at night with a camcorder with a night vision attachment to it and try to see if I can get a picture of a Sasquatch possibly crossing a road or a game trail. And I'll sit and watch and listen, hopefully to get a picture.
Joining Fred Bradshaw and Cliff Crook around their campfire tonight are Erica Koski and Clark Hewlett. They want to learn more about Bigfoot and hear about Fred and Cliff's encounters with them.
This creature, whatever it was standing there. There was hair that come down over the face, down off the cheeks, but the rest of it was all heavy hair except through portions of the chest. There were some open areas.
Oh, did you get a good look at the teeth? Were they sharp or?
Yes, they are very much like our teeth. They're rounded. The eyes were quite large. They were brownish yellow in color. They were very strong looking hands. It had callus, kind of, from digging, I imagine what it was from. But it was the most awesome thing that I'd ever seen in my life.
It's pretty amazing hearing you guys tell your stories about it.
Stories?
For sure.
Yeah,
or, I mean, your
stories,
accounts.
Yeah. You'll see about 90% of those reports, accurately investigated, turn out to be mistaken identities. That's about 90%. That's a lot of percent. But what's ever left, you got that.
The talk runs late into the night. Everyone in the forest is now prepared for a Bigfoot sighting. But will one appear? And if one does, what exactly should the searchers do? After 2 days and 2 nights in Quinault Forest, Bigfoot researcher John Pickering is going home empty-handed. On his final day, he's joined by his friend John Larson, a hunter.
Haven't found much this weekend. The weather hasn't really cooperated too well, as you can tell, and it's hard to track in this type of terrain sometimes, looking for tracks. There's some old elk sign, deer sign. Seen a couple deer yesterday. There's some other hunters running around the area, so we have to be careful about that. We don't want to interfere with their hunt.
Before returning home, John Pickering sets up one last piece of equipment, which he hopes will trap a Bigfoot on film.
Basically, I'll pick a location that I feel that a Sasquatch or other animals may travel through and set it up in a location to try to get the best possible picture. I try to leave it for at least 2 weeks at a time, sometimes 3, sometimes a month. And then I'll come back and check to see how many exposures have been taken. Over a couple weeks, you'll get a couple hits. Sometimes it'll be deer, sometimes elk. You never know. Hopefully, a Sasquatch.
Pickering's cameras caught plenty of wildlife activity in the forest, but no Bigfoot. Pickering's friend, John Larson, is a hunter. He doesn't go hunting for Bigfoot. In fact, he doesn't even believe they exist. But he does know what it would take to bring one down.
People often would claim that they needed a really big caliber rifle to bring down something if a Bigfoot existed. But I would say that any of your deer caliber rifles would probably work. It's shot placement that would be the most critical thing. If you got a good shot to the heart or neck or head area, you can bring down pretty much any size game.
If anyone does ever find the animal, there is one question that is being hotly debated by Bigfoot researchers. Should it be killed and brought back for scientific analysis? On one hand, there are people like John Green. He is in no doubt that only a dead Bigfoot will satisfy the skeptics.
This is just an animal, and a very important animal. The proper thing to do is to knock it down and bring it back, or bring back a piece of it. This, I know, is a very unpopular viewpoint, but that's still my opinion. That I see no excuse for treating these animals differently from other animals.
20 years ago, we were still in a museum philosophy where to establish the existence of a new species, one had to be collected. Collecting being a euphemism for shot and killed, so we had a skin, bones and the study skin for a museum. We don't do that anymore. We accept photographic evidence and, well, photographic evidence, maybe sound recordings. But with the Sasquatch, we're not accepting a film. We're not accepting plaster casts of tracks. So sure, there's an incentive for some people to go and try and collect one.
I'm not at all bloodthirsty. I don't hunt anything. But this is what science requires. Why should we have any hang-ups over it? We do, and the reason that we do is just because it looks like us.
But killing a Bigfoot may not be as simple as killing other animals.
One of the great dilemmas in the pursuit of Sasquatch and obtaining one is the moral danger that haunts us here, because if it is discovered post-mortem that this creature is of the genus Homo, you've committed homicide by shooting and killing one.
And surprisingly, the scientist who doesn't believe Bigfoot even exists is against the idea of killing it, or even finding it.
Do you, if you in fact discover Sasquatch or other unknown creatures, what is your role? Should you in fact make it known to the general public, and maybe even to the general scientific public, that yes, in fact, these creatures exist? Because there's one thing we know about humans above all else, and that is whatever we touch, we destroy. And that, to me, is the ethical question. Not do you shoot or don't you shoot, but if you find, do you report it or do you not report it? That's the question that you have to struggle with.
John Pickering and John Larson didn't find a Bigfoot. But like countless others who come every year to the Pacific Northwest, they had a memorable weekend in one of America's great wildernesses. And it was Bigfoot, or the Sasquatch, that brought the two men here. So perhaps the mystery of Bigfoot, which has lasted for centuries and may last for many more, is, after all, the most important thing about it.
There are a lot of people that will be upset if it is actually solved, because a lot of people get a lot of enjoyment out of the camaraderie that they get out of this. In all probability, I may never see one, so it's a possibility that I'm looking for something that's not there. I believe it is, but may not be.
I would hate to think as a scientist, or even as a non-scientist, that we know everything. And that may be part of the lure of Sasquatch. Even if they don't exist, they fulfill something very, very important in the way that we see the world. We need to feel that there are things out there yet that we don't know.